Welcome to the MMHP in the 989, channeling all styles and eras of Michigan music history. Recorded live from the Michigan Rock Legends Hall of Fame, located inside the Bay County Historical Museum.
From the city by the bay.
Featuring Dr. J, Fred Reif, Mr. Mike, and your host, Scott Baker. Brought to you by the 989 Podcast Network and the Michigan Rock Legends Hall of Fame, located at the Bay County Historical Society Museum at 321 Washington Avenue, Bay City, Michigan.
Of course, there was this third Savage Grace album.
Yeah, that's available.
That's available, One Night in America, which Ron Koss, it's me and Ron. I tried to get the entire band to do it, but getting people to fly in, whatever reasons, it doesn't matter. It didn't work out. So Jeff Jones, who had been part of Savage Grace behind the scenes for years, he had a studio. Ron and I went in and we used Mark Goujon, who played in Lightning with me and also played with Mitch Ryder for 13 years, playing bass and singing. Heck of a voice, great voice. And his timbre happens to match mine, so it worked really well together. And Jim Clary, who Ron knew from the band America. He had been backup. He played keys and saxophone. And then we used Billy Gordon, who was with me in a band called Measured Chaos. And we recorded this third Savage Grace record, and it's got some great songs on it. Some of the stuff Ron wrote is literally prophetic. And Goujon has some songs on there. I have songs on there. No covers. It's all original material. And I think 14 songs, some ridiculous amount of tunes. And that's available on iTunes, I think every song except one. And I play some of them now still.
Is that on vinyl?
No, it's basically just out there electronically.
Okay. Yeah. What year did that come out?
Oh my gosh.
I know this is probably
Help me
fodder
out,
for later, but so it's a lot more recent.
It'd be in the 90s,
it was the late 90s.
Yeah.
Late 90s. Because Koss died in
2004.
2004, so it was late 90s, maybe early 2000s. It took us a long time to record because many of us were working. I was in multiple bands, so we would record on Sundays, and a lot of times we brought our kids with us. Mm-hmm. So it was a fun project. My son plays kabasa or some crazy noisy thing on one tune, and my daughter sang harmonies on one song. But that's a really good record as far as I'm concerned.
I can't wait to hear that.
You know.
Yeah.
Have you heard a lot of the stuff?
Yeah.
Yes?
I haven't heard the stuff I haven't heard is the second album. I own the first one.
Okay, but because I
and
can
that's
send
up
you
at
guys.
Scotty Sandbar, the album cover.
We got to make sure I have email addresses and stuff because I have all of that stuff in MP3 form, which isn't as cool as the WAV files I have, but the WAV files are like this
you
big.
need a WeTransfer on those.
And sending them online, MP3s end up being it, but they still sound pretty darn good.
Yeah, I definitely, because you can't get number 2.
Really? I have all that stuff.
It's not available on Apple Music. I don't know if it's neither of the first 2 albums are available. The only one that's available is One Night in America.
That's because I put it on there. Took a while.
Are those the first 2 still owned by Warner?
I think that Rhino bought the catalog. Okay. From what I understand,
they were issued as 2 albums on 1 CD. I think
we did that. Jeff Jones did that. 33 1/3 Records, which is Jeff Jones, who has a huge presence in the whole Savage Grace thing, and also was in my band, my band. There goes that ego. The band, The Hideaways. Yeah. He was lead guitar player.
Yeah, we shouldn't get too off.
I'll just ramble all over the place.
Well, because we want to get into some of this stuff as we talk to you.
Stream of consciousness, that's me.
Certainly.
We'll definitely get to this. We're back here at the Michigan Rock and Roll Legends Hall of Fame for a very special episode, night before a show that we put on. We did this last fall. The whole gang is here. And I want to let Gary just take off. He's been waiting for this moment for a long time. Go ahead, Gary.
Well, of course, Savage Grace is an inductee to the Michigan Rock and Roll Legends Hall of Fame. So we are so proud and happy to have Al Jacquez here, the lead singer and bass player for Savage Grace. But as we're going to find out, it's much, much more than just Savage Grace. So let's start out at the start. I thought, I interviewed you what would have been about 3 or 4 years ago,
right,
when I was doing the biography for the website of Savage Grace, and I found it real interesting that your parents were not born in America.
Right. Mom and Dad were both born in France, in Alsace.
Okay.
So,
and then how did they end up coming to America? What was the situation there?
My mom came over when she was, I believe, 7 months old, and my dad came over when he was 7 years old. And it was just the families wanted to get to America. My grandfather on my dad's side spent a few years over here alone. He was an artist working just to get enough money to get the family over to the States. It was just, they wanted to get out of Europe,
Did your mother and fathers, did their families know each other?
Yeah, they did, as it turns out.
Oh, okay.
When I was a kid, used to sometimes go to these dances, the l'Union Alsacienne, and it was all these crazy French people, and I mean, they'd have these halls, rent a hall, and have these dances, and we'd be dancing the polka, and they served all this great French food. And the Alsatian food is interesting because it's a mix of French and German. So you'd have sauerkraut with sausage maybe, and then also have things like coq au vin, and they'd have their own little names, but it was like a very excellent level of food.
All right. Food. Well, where did you live when you were? Your folks got married in America then?
Yes.
And then you lived in New York City?
Well, I was born in New York City, but then right after I was born, my dad, because he was a doctor, was called back into the Army. Because at that time, he was honorably discharged after the Second World War. But back then, early 50s for the Korean conflict, you could, if you were an MD, the Army could say, you're coming back. So he was called in, transferred to Fort Knox. So we lived in Fort Knox for a while. And that's where my brother Nicholas was born in 54. But we lived there. Then once he got out of there, we ended up coming back to New York and lived in Queens. Yes, in Queens at 6032 70th Avenue. I still remember.
Oh, geez. All right. My son lived in Queens, Astoria, Queens, for a while when he and his then girlfriend, now wife, moved to New York City. So when did you end up moving to Michigan?
My dad was a research scientist. He was an MD, but he ended up doing most of his work as a research scientist. And the U of M offered him a lab. He was at Sloan Kettering Institute in upstate New York, where we lived. And then he got offered a lab, his own lab, by the U of M. And so we moved to Ann Arbor. And that was, I don't know all the years, but I started 7th grade in Ann Arbor.
Okay.
That's Tappan Junior High School.
So this would have been in the 50s or early 60s?
Early 60s.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is this when you got into, let's say, rock and roll music? Was that at that point?
Well, let me see. I started singing in church when I was 6. I was a boy soprano. Got into, loved pop music and Elvis and listened to all these other forms. But when I first heard the Beatles, which was when I was in Ann Arbor, that's when I said, oh, hey, I could do that. Really, not realizing it sounds so simple when you listen to it.
Right.
And they did it so well. But then when you try to do it yourself, you realize, oh my gosh,
well,
there's some
alone.
ability here.
Yes, but you weren't alone.
Gee, these characters can write,
inspired.
they can sing.
Yeah.
But the Beatles kind of got me the thought of, okay, I can do this, and started taking guitar lessons.
Guitar lessons,
yeah,
right?
At Herb David Guitar Studio in Ann Arbor.
Did you go to school the same time as Iggy? Because he went to Tappan. I read his book when I was still living in Ann Arbor, and I lived right across the street from Tappan.
Right. I think Ig was a couple years before me, because I remember seeing the Iguanas when I was still in high school.
Because he got his start there at Tappan, I guess, as a duo, singing with somebody.
I didn't know that. I saw him in the Iguanas because my band, the Hideaways, was doing. There was all these fraternity gigs there, and so Ig and the Iguanas, they had gotten that. They had that sewed up, but a lot of the high school bands then would do I mean, you need more than one band to play at all those fraternities. So we played a ton of fraternities. We made good money. We were kids, you know. It was crazy. But I think Iggy was a couple years. James was a couple years ahead of us.
When I had talked to you initially, one thing that really fascinated me was that one of your guitar teachers was Dan Erlewine.
Right.
And the prime movers, of course, are in the Michigan Rock and Roll Legends Hall of Fame.
Oh, yeah.
And kind of very highly thought of blues band of Ann Arbor. You can tell us a little bit about how did Dan influence you as far as your love of music? Did he introduce you to the blues or anything like that?
Yeah, in a sense. What Dan did, which was really cool, besides teaching us guitar, was when we would say, I want to learn, I remember this specifically, Jeff wanted to learn how to play a solo that's on the Kinks, it was a Kinks record. And Dan said, that's no good. Listen to this. And he had told us to go listen to Albert King, B.B. King. And he said, you like the Beatles? Then listen to Smokey Robinson. Where do you think they got? You really got a hold on me. Do a little work. And we start listening to these other artists, Howlin' Wolf. And it's mind-boggling. I mean, it blew what? It just blew your mind. Because I had listened to opera and musicals and Broadway songs and pop rock, Elvis, and then the Beatles, right? But you start to hear Howlin' Wolf or Sonny Boy Williamson, and it was that direction. Daniel pushed us. He said, you listen to where they're getting their influences from. Don't just look at the Beatles, look at the history. Just as if you were looking at a painter. Who'd he study with? Oh, he studied with Leonardo da Vinci. That explains something. Same thing.
Yeah.
But he was good at that. I have great respect for Dan, and he could play. The man could play.
He's still a luthier, isn't he?
Yes, from what I understand.
Okay.
I don't know if he's playing or not, but man, that man could play.
Yeah, I did. Most of my contact, in fact, just about all my contact with the prime movers was through Michael Erlewine.
Right.
And pretty interesting guy in his own right. So the Hideaways, did you incorporate any of this blues into your sets?
We were doing cover material. It wasn't so much blues, maybe some blues influence, but we were into. We did, like some Otis Redding, Sam and Dave, some Beatles, some Ray Charles, maybe some Stones. A lot of it was what did the fraternities want to hear, but then also we would put in something like What I Say. Because for two reasons, because Ray was cool, Ray Charles was ridiculously great, and then also you could stretch that one, and you're doing 4 sets and you're 16 years old, a couple songs you needed to stretch. So it's the old conundrum,
Yeah.
How much music can you stuff into that time? But so we did those, we covered some of that soul and R&B, which was crazy because we were 16 years old in high school trying to be Otis Redding or Sam Cooke or something.
Well, our current podcast that's being aired is with Steve Lyman.
Right.
And Steve told us about the Who's first appearance in Michigan at the Fifth Dimension and how SRC, or the Scott Richard Case as they were at that particular time, loaned the Who their equipment for the afternoon show. And I had forgotten that you had played on that gig.
Yep.
So
Highways.
were you the opening band and then the Time and then
The Who? Yep.
Okay. What do you remember about that particular night?
A couple things. I remember since we were more doing or trying to drift towards R&B, well, we had 3 of the guys in the band had matching sweaters, and I had a sweater that was slightly different because I was the lead singer.
Oh, okay.
And we, but we were literally doing Sam and Dave songs, and I remember at one point seeing some video of James Brown or Otis Redding and doing a thing where I went down on my knees, which is ludicrous, but what the heck? You're working out. And the other thing I remember is when they were setting up, the roadie comes in for the Who, and there's boxes. I think it was Premier. He's brand new drums. He pulls them out of these boxes, takes the front head off, puts the bass drum down where he's gonna, pulls out a hammer and nails the sucker right into the stage. We're like, what? And it was because eventually, I mean, Keith Moon just beat his drums to death, and then at one point he had put his foot behind the bass drum and just kicked it and ripped it all up. So the bottom of it still stuck on the stage, and the drum is all torn up. So, I mean, and he was our age, just about. I mean, he was a year, maybe 2 years older than us, and then seeing, I mean, Townsend doing the windmills and there's blood coming off his hands. It was a very different than what we were doing. You know, maximum R&B.
Right.
We were trying to assimilate R&B, and they're doing, you know, they were pushing the envelope.
And you also opened for the Jimi Hendrix Experience.
Yeah, opened for Hendrix. That was
and then
mind-boggling.
I think Steve Vandenberg of the Time told me he was on that show too.
Yeah.
So the same two bands opened.
Yeah,
for Hendrix as open for the Who.
Yeah.
What do you remember about the Hendrix show? That must have been something else, seeing him in a small little place like that.
It was. A couple of things I remember is that he just really came across. I don't know if mellow was the right word, but gentle. I mean, this guy, I mean, he obviously could play and was pushing the blues to this other level, but he was a sort of an easy singer. He didn't try to get real high. I don't think he had a big range. You know, I heard he didn't like his voice, but neither did John Lennon, so what the heck. But he came across in a gentle kind of fashion, and when they started out with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which was at that time, of course, that album. Oh my gosh! And he did. It was cool because it was his version. It wasn't the Beatles. It was him, but he was still true to the song. Sounded great. And then I remember there being an issue with an amp or something, and Hendrix pulling his cable out of one amp, tiptoeing across the stage and plugging into this other amp and playing. And he was laughing or smiling, or I mean, I just thought it was cool. He didn't get all nonplussed and throw an ego fit or whatever. He just figured out a way to keep the show going. And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
How did you get on those two bills?
Probably Jeep Holland.
Oh, yeah? Okay.
Yeah, Jeep Holland managed. I mean, there's so much history all wrapped up in. I got to be part of some of these incredible times. I mean, Jeep Holland was managing the Rationals, and the Rationals, Scott Morgan and all the guys were, except for Bill, were seniors when we were juniors, and we were not following the Rationals, but watching them going, oh, this is cool. And then Jeep said, we went to Jeep, and he said, yeah, we'll manage you guys, you know. And so he started sending us some gigs. We opened up some gigs for the Rationals up at Mount Holly, but it was Jeep that got us on those cool gigs, I'm pretty sure.
That's awesome.
And also one of our buddies who was a roadie knew Dick Ahern, who had, I'm not sure if he knew he designed the Fifth Dimension, and that might have had some pull too, but I think it was probably Jeep. He helped a lot of bands, SRC, Time. Mm-hmm. I mean, you go to his office and there's all these crazies walking, you know, Dick Wagner, when do you give me a job, Dick? Jeep, come on. You know, just, Dick would call on the phone when you were there. Do you hear him yelling at Jeep? You know, because Dick was serious.
How, or why did the Hideaways break up? You guys sounded like you were pretty successful.
You know, I don't know for sure. Probably might have to do with people going off to college. I'm pretty sure the drummer ended up playing, you know, teaching percussion, and actually played with Tony Williams' Lifetime for a while. Guy was, I mean,
who's that?
Guy named Tigger Benford, Robert Benford. He was the guy in high school who could play, had great time, could play, had a super drum set, could read and all this stuff when we were all still fun. Is that an E chord, Jeff? Yeah, it's an E, you know. And Robert was already in the symphony band or whatever. Yeah. So I think he ended up going off to college or something. I don't really recall all that exactly.
So
what happened.
Your run with that band was basically about a year and a half, 2 years?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
You know, but we played a lot of gigs in Michigan. And Peter Andrews managed us for a while too, because we played Mothers up in Tawas, which was hoot. Played there with Terry Knight and the Pack, as a matter of fact. But
there were some others in Ann Arbor too.
Yeah, we played there too. Remember, the Rationals used to play there. Prime Movers. Iggy played there. Chosen Few played there. That was pre-SRC.
Right.
Chosen Few played there. That was a good venue too. But so that whole Pete Andrews, G. Polland thing, I think they were actually working together for a while. We were in that part of that.
Was all those bands at that time period that you were playing with, and that some that went on along with you to bigger things, everybody got along? You guys like would see so and so and from another band, and everybody's like, "Hey, we're on the same bill tonight, cool," or was it random?
Maybe partially random. I mean, remember getting along well with the Rationals because we were in the same high school, you know. But within any group, you're going to have very gregarious people, and then you're going to have people that are more shy. And then sometimes, like Scott Morgan was more shy, and then he'd go on stage and you'd listen. He'd kick your ass, you know. Yeah. He was in high school and doing some really great work.
It seems like your era, from a musician standpoint nowadays, at my age, everybody kind of mingled and mixed well. I don't know about the personal stories, but it's like the bands all interacted, interchanged. They're all together. So many great stories of, Jeep working so many different bands.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there's no, a lot of times you see nowadays, there's like, well, we're going to do our area, you do your area. That kind of, they get that vibe sometimes, no one's really reaching out to, there's no managers either nowadays for the the people that are regional musicians or whatever. But you guys sure had a scene.
Yeah. Well, there were so many places to play too.
True. Read my mind.
That
just read my mind.
Yeah, that was a big factor in those days. You guys could probably play 2 or 3 days a week, every weekend, right?
Right. I mean, as high school kids, we would try real hard to get study hall on Friday afternoon because then we would skip out of school, get our gear or had the gear in the cars, go to, I wasn't even driving at the time, so the bass player, I remember a lot of gear in his car. We'd go to a fraternity and play at 3 or 3:30, play a TG. Thank God it's Friday party, 2 sets, and then go somewhere and then play a party that night and then play another gig Saturday night, sometimes with a gig Saturday afternoon. So you do 3 gigs a week. And I remember some of the Friday and Saturday night gigs, it would be, $100 or $125 for the band. But if you do the inflation, that's like $800 nowadays. Mm-hmm. I mean,
so you went gig to gig, getting paid,
and we got paid, and it was interesting. We very rarely got screwed for the money. I mean, you're at a fraternity. Here, kid, take your money. Yeah. They thought we were, a lot of the fraternity guys were either 1 year ahead of us. We were seniors in high school. They were, freshmen in college, or they were 3-4 years older. I said, here, kid, have your money. It was as long as you went there and sang a bunch of tunes and did a decent job. It was golden. And what was cool is here we are. We're playing 2 gigs in one day. You're playing the same songs. Mm-hmm. You don't have the greatest gear in the world, but we had decent gear, and you're learning how to play at the gig. It's on the job training. You
right
can't
there.
beat it.
No. How would mom and dad say about all those gigs and all that playing from 10th grade on?
Actually, my parents were really pretty supportive. They
saw the income? Or just your enthusiasm?
I think both? The enthusiasm, they respected the fact that we made some money. They were basically supportive. Yeah, it was wonderful. Cool. When I got a little older and got stupider, they didn't like some of that stuff. But there's usually a time period where young males, when they're full of piss and vinegar, have issues with their family. So we did, and we worked it out. So it ended up being a good situation. But yeah, they were basically supportive. They were supportive of almost anything that I did because I was doing theater for a while, and
they saw your artistic side.
Yeah, and my grandfather was a painter.
And they weren't afraid to say he's going to Tawas from Ann Arbor tonight. He said, "No, drive safe, honey."
What's funny with that is the reason we went to Tawas is because Peter Andrews came to my house and talked to my parents, playing the responsible adult. He had been in the Air Force, not Air Force, was it Air Force or Navy? He'd been one of the academies. Was it Air Force? And injured playing football, blah, blah, blah. And he could really present that. He could sell it. So he took us up there, and we were up there for 3 days.
Nice.
And it was a good gig,
That's cool. What a story.
Got to play with Terry Knight and the Pack, and I remember I said, I'm going to make an entrance. So the band started, and I stayed way in the back of the club. And when they started kicking out the first tune, I walked through the audience to go on the stage. I was wearing Madras pants and some weird shirt. It was a way to learn, but you learn stuff.
Yeah,
you take some of your theater background, whatever, and apply it to rock and roll. And the other thing was that you mentioned it. We got to work. We were playing all the time. And then later it was even more. Savage Grace, we could work 6 days a week if we wanted.
Yeah, those were the good old days.
Yeah, there was work. So, of course, people got better.
Yeah. But you, after the Hideaways breakup, you did enroll in college, right?
Yeah, I did.
University of Michigan.
University of Michigan.
Yeah, you got to tell us who you were in music theater with.
Oh, right. Well, it was interesting. I enrolled in U of M and went into the speech program, and part of the speech thing was you could do theater, and I ended up doing, I did Troilus and Cressida, which is Shakespeare, with Mark Metcalf, who was in, Animal House. And the Metcalfs are actually some big producers in California. He was one of their, I'm not cousin or son, whatever, nice guy. He played Achilles, I was Patroclus, and then also in that group was Gilda Radner, and then another woman named Maureen Anderman, who ended up being a really highly accomplished, big-time Broadway actress, but not, serious Broadway dramatic actress, So, again, I got to hang out with these people.
Was Gilda Radner, of course, she's famous as being a comedian. Did she have any signs that at that time, did she do any humor or anything that gave you any indication that she was going to be a major star in Saturday Night Live in the future?
That's a really interesting question. I think I was pretty much wrapped up in myself, trying to negotiate all this. I'm out of high school. I'm doing these productions. I had been in music, and I thought maybe I was out of music then. So I was pretty wrapped up in myself. But I remember Gilda being a very nice person and funny. But I don't think I had the vision to say, oh my gosh, this is a comedian. This woman is really, really good. I don't think I really had the vision to see that. And also, I only worked with her on a few productions. It's not like I hung out with her every day.
Yeah, you were living it in real time. You didn't know who was going to end up being who down the road.
Yeah.
Oh,
so when you were at Michigan, though, you get an offer for a band called the Scarlet Letter, right?
Right.
And these are at least 3 of the guys ended up being your bandmates in Savage Grace, right?
Yep. Well, they had.
So how did that transpire?
Well, my understanding, it was a 5-piece band, Scarlet Letter, with Ron, Larry, and John. And then they had 2 other players, Dennis Kaverick, who ended up in Gallery, great bass player, and the other guy's name slips my mind. Gary Prague, good singer. They wanted to go more rock, and they wanted to have 4 pieces instead of 5. So they said, well, let's get a singing bass player. Well, their roadie, who had worked with Jeep, who knew Jeff Jones really well, called up Jeff and said, hey, doesn't Al sings? Does he play bass? I remember being at Jeff's house and Rick calling on the phone. And he said, yeah, I play bass. I didn't even have a bass. And I said, yeah, I play bass. Well, these guys are looking for a singing bass player. Come audition. So we got a bass somehow, and went there and I auditioned. And I think I was just, loud enough and, I had the right hair and could kind of play that they said, yeah, let's give a go of it. And then Ron, I had studied theory in high school, so I understood the relationship of, what kind of notes I could play, descending lines in classical music and stuff like that. And a lot of their songs were had that kind of that Bach, the classical.
That was probably more John. Is it Senor?
Yeah, Senor. But Ron could play anything. So Ron, I had studied theory, so I had some knowledge, and then Ron was a good teacher. They said, you don't have to play the root there. Play the major third. And I knew what the major third was, so I wasn't a complete idiot. So I could work through the stuff. And again, we played a lot. So when we first got together, we rehearsed 6 days a week for 3 months.
I'm curious as to why did you change the name? I mean, the Scarlet Letter they put out a couple records, couple 45s anyway, on the same label that the Amboy Dukes were on.
Right, mainstream.
So they already kind of had a name. Why did they decide to change it to Savage Grace? Do you remember?
I never really asked them that. My understanding was that the Scarlet Letter thing really didn't work. The singles didn't really do much of anything, and they wanted to go in a little harder direction. So they changed it, and it's Jerry Lubin who came up with the name. Lubin was in rehearsal at we rehearsed in John Senor's mother's living room.
Lubin was
from
a DJ?
ABX. From WABX, he was a DJ,
and he also got into management.
He managed us for a while.
Okay.
He was sitting in the middle of the floor listening to us. I mean, we would write and create these songs right in front of him. So it was a heady experience because you'd be working on a tune, and John would come and bring something to you, sing you some lyrics, and then we'd start literally putting the thing together. This is too fast. This is too slow. Let's be quiet here. I mean, and it was really interesting. And Jerry was sitting in the middle of the floor, and he goes, "This is Savage Grace." Well, okay, but it's really that kind of thing. I don't know if it was quite that simple, but we said, "Yeah, let's do that. Let's use it as the name."
Too cool.
So,
how did your parents say? I'm going to say, especially your dad, since he's a doctor and been to a lot of school. How did he react when you basically dropped out of U of M then, right?
I did, because we got the deal. They weren't happy, but I had just turned 18 when we were about to sign the deal. So he was technically legal age, but Warner's asked to have my parents sign the record contract just in case there was any issue about me being, non-compos mentis or whatever. But so they signed the deal. I mean, it was a legitimate deal. It was not a good deal, but it was real with a real label, and then I ended up getting a SAG card out of it, being in AFTRA, and some good things ended up coming out of it later.
Mm-hmm. The first time I saw you was at Olympia.
Oh, wow.
And you opened, of course, I didn't have any idea who Savage Grace was. We went there because Creedence Clearwater Revival was the headliner, and they had the Box Tops and I think the James Gang, and you guys were the opening band. We had great seats, and I was really impressed. How did you get to the point where you're now playing at a place like Olympia and opening for some big heavyweights in a venue like that seats, I don't know, what, 12, 15,000 people at Olympia? I mean, you get a lot of people in there,
Yeah. What was interesting is that time we didn't have our deal yet. We got our deal because of that gig, because we got a standing ovation. And I think, I'm trying to remember the name of the character, A&R guy from Warner Reprise he was there. I'm trying to remember his name. And that's when he ended up calling up the Warner's people and saying, "You got to do something with these guys. They're incredible."
Yeah, you guys, if I remember correctly, didn't you close with All Along the Watchtower? I mean, a great closing number, and your version was so different, really, from the Hendrix version.
Right.
Or, of course, Bob Dylan's.
Right.
Yeah, right.
And even from Dave Mason's. But, we closed with that, almost always did. And we got a standing ovation, and the A&R guy ended up, starting to communicate with Warner Brothers. He worked for them, and that was what led to our deal, no doubt about it. That particular gig, And Creedence, I remember John Fogerty was a very nice man. I didn't get to talk to him, but someone said, Fogerty actually said, hey, you guys, half joking, you want me to play? I mean, it was like, yeah, of course. But it was cool that he was, that instead of, being a snotty star, he was like, hey, you guys want me to play? Well, of course. And they went out and did what they did, which was completely different than us. And he kicked butt. I mean, he was great at it. No doubt about it. Guy wrote great songs.
Yeah, they were probably the top band in America at that point.
Oh.
Just every single was, number one or top 10 at least. So how did you got to deal with Reprise?
Right.
Was it you put a single out and then if that did well, you did an album, or was it an album right off the get-go?
Pretty sure it was an album deal right off the bat.
I remember the single.
Yeah,
Come On Down.
Coming Down with Me. Yeah, that got to be 19 on KNR and 22 on CKLW. What a great thing to hear your record on the airwaves. And then was bubbling under the top 100, on the Billboard charts, right? I mean, it was so cool.
Yeah. So was the album completed when they put out Come On Down as a single, or did?
Yeah, we had finished the album and then they picked Come On Down out of it.
All right. And if I remember correctly, you actually recorded that song in Detroit, right?
Yeah, we did. We recorded Come On Down at Artie Field Studios. And I still think maybe we should have finished the record there. I don't know. It's all conjecture at that point. But either Joe Wizard, the producer, or the engineer wanted a better studio. I don't know if it's better or not. Maybe someplace they were used to, and then also the whole idea of you take the boys out of Detroit where they're the stars and take them out to LA, and it's going to make them a little more malleable and a little bit easier to influence. And, and I didn't think about that at the time, but it's like, oh yeah, let's, we get them out of their familiar territory, because we'll have more control.
Was there ever any thought of releasing All Along the Watchtower as a single? I know it was probably over 5 minutes.
There was a cut down version, from what I understand, was number 1 in San Jose, but the record company never supported it.
Yeah, boy.
So that could have gone, and that would have been a whole other saga. Who knows? But then we're here now. And if Savage Grace had been a lot bigger, I don't know if all of us would have lived to be here right now to tell the story.
Okay. So everybody in the band is still with us then?
Well, Ron, at that point,
Ron has passed.
Ron's
right.
passed, but everybody's still around now. I'm out working. And who knows how why all these things happen or how they exactly work.
So did Reprise put you on the road? A lot of times especially when you're putting out your first album, the record company will line up gigs where you're opening for an established act just to kind of, get you out there and get more and more people to hear your music. Did you do any of that? Did you open for any big names?
Well, we did. Cavallo and Ruffalo put us out with, they were tight with Warner's, but they were our management. They put us out with John Sebastian. And we did like an East Coast tour with John Sebastian, which John Sebastian is great. Super nice man, wrote all these incredible songs. But the audience that came to see him, I don't think we're quite prepared for a band to walk out on the stage. And here's a guy with a bass, no shoes, a loincloth, no shirt, hair down to here, screaming at them, which is totally different than, what a day for a daydream.
Right.
And don't misread any negativity to John Sebastian, because I met the man, great writer, loved the blues, could play harmonica like a virtuoso.
Yeah,
but it just wasn't the right fit. I'm trying to think. I saw John Sebastian a couple times during that time, and he was basically out there by himself, like a solo he might have been using Kenny Altman from Fifth Avenue Band playing bass with him or something. But, again, it was that whole very musical, baritone folk thing, and here's Savage Grace. We come out basically, screaming at him, and wearing a loincloth and stuff. It's just...
He wrote Welcome Back Cotter down there.
Right, he did.
I heard the
Ron
original
Koss
version was Welcome Back Loincloth, and he changed it.
Right, he did. He changed it. But Ron Koss played on that.
Did he really?
Yeah, he and John Sebastian were close.
Nice.
And he played with John, and he was on those sessions. And he would get, for quite some time, Ron was getting royalties still off of those sessions, which is great that Ron was able to do that. But he was a very accomplished schooled player. So...
I think you had told me that Ron had played some sessions at Motown.
Yeah, he did. He did some early sessions at Motown. He was quite young, and I remember him telling me he was like the only white guy on the sessions. And some of the older guys would, sort of took him under their wing.
Was that before?
That was well before.
Well before.
Yeah.
Okay.
He also played on. I think he did something with Wilson Pickett. And he played with, did something for Hank Ballard. I don't want to quote the history wrong, but he did a lot of session work. He played on "Oh How Happy" by Shades of Blue. The guitar, chink, chink. That's Ron.
Wow.
Okay, yeah. It's recorded right in Detroit.
Yeah, and he did a lot of commercial work too. Kowalski and all these different. He and Zach did a lot of commercial work together. So.
Where was he out of originally? Ann Arbor as well?
No, Ron was East Side Detroit boy.
East Side Detroit?
Yeah, parents were, worked at Chrysler, one of the auto companies. Same with Zach, East Side. His family, I think, worked in one of the auto factories. Polish extraction, lived on the East Side. Hardworking guys.
When I was working with Dick Wagner, towards the end, well, actually, when the book came out, we were talking about it, the group that's left up here in Saginaw area. We found that one of the first professional thing that Dick played on, when no one knows what it is, but it's a Motown song. And I'm like, oh, he must have came out when Ron was doing the Motown thing because they're about the same era.
Right.
And so I didn't even know that Ron was doing it too. But, a lot of guys got their feet wet with that, I guess. And there's so many things that didn't have the names of who played on what, You
right.
don't know what's going on.
And also Ron said that sometimes they do 3 sides in a session, and there was no vocal on it.
Oh.
They didn't even know what the name of the song was or who was going to sing it. And he said, I might have played on a Stevie Wonder tune. I don't know for sure.
Right.
Yeah,
the writers then would come in and put a song over the grooves that the Funk Brothers or the session musicians had laid down. You guys also played at Goose Lake, right?
Yeah, we did. That was...
What do you remember about that festival? Probably the most famous festival in Michigan rock and roll history.
It was, it's funny because there's now the Greenwood Family Acres? It's a campground. Mm-hmm. And the towers are still up. And I went out there last summer and did a solo gig opening up for Magic Bus, which is like this.
Yes, they played in Bay City numerous times.
Opening up for them, which was really fun. And, I turn around, I'm playing in this pavilion, and I turn around and I look behind me, and there's those towers that I could see from the stage when I was playing Goose Lake. And then there's a building there, a rec building, which is exactly where the stage was and faces out. So I went in there and looked out the front door, and it's like, okay, I kind of remember.
Wow.
It was a wild. It was a big festival. It was huge. What was really interesting to me about that festival is that so many good bands in Michigan bands, Seeger, Teegar and Van Winkle, SRC, I believe, were there. Third Power.
Stooges put that album out. Right? That album came out on Third Man with that finally.
Yeah, Iggy ended up being one of the best acts there, I think.
It was the same weekend as the Ann Arbor Blues Fest.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, I was at the Blues
Which
Festival.
I was at.
Yeah. Fred and I didn't know each other, but we were at the Blues Festival.
Wow. But it was interesting, all those bands, including, international acts, and I'm not sure how much attention that, the festival got from anyone on either coast. And it always kind of kind of bugged me, kind of irritated.
There's a special.
Well, it got some
right?
negative. There was so much negative publicity about it. And then you hear, like, a lot of people that went there just had a wonderful time.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, there was just, like a drug marketplace, and there was,
well, that didn't happen at Woodstock.
Yeah, right.
I just saw something
Ann Arbor Blues Fest.
Right.
I saw something on YouTube just recently, and I'm sure you guys probably have seen it, but it was about that festival, and they were like how it was just before Woodstock, right? Wasn't it?
It was
after.
Just
It was
after.
after
But they
Woodstock.
compared it to that in that special I was watching on YouTube.
Well, they got all involved in Michigan government, Attorney General
Right.
Frank Kelly, and
Right.
Governor Milliken, and everybody coming down hard on the festival. So yeah, it had this, kind of a negative feeling about it afterward, at least in the press. It wasn't portrayed like Woodstock was by any means.
I got you there. Yeah, but I saw what they were doing with it. I'm like, tons of people.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of people there, and they have some great music, and they had a really good time. I don't know.
Well, they put that guy out of business, basically.
Basically, yeah.
Because of all the negativity. That was the only concert that was ever held there,
Mm-hmm.
the only festival. And it was built to be, something that was going to last for, years.
Right. Yeah, a festival.
Festival site.
Yeah, festival site, exactly. But it was a great gig.
Wonder who has the master tapes of your. I bet you everything got recorded. They're finding all these tapes from that show, now.
Well, there was a guy who shot it. I'm not sure if they may have shot at 16 millimeter instead of 35, but those tapes and that film, because it was shot in film, ended up in his basement for years. And then there was a divorce, and he never had the tapes. Then there was again, some of this is foggy because Jeff Jones, again, whose name comes up, knew the guy who did that. And I think he actually sent a feed from the board to their guys. They ended up, there was a divorce. He never got the tapes. Some of them were moldy. You hear all these different things, but there's actually well over an hour, like not a director's cut, just sort of a layoff of all that stuff. And there's Stooges, Savage Grace, a bunch of bands. I have a DVD of it in my files.
Cool.
Yeah. But it ended up never. We saw a cut of it in LA when we were doing our second album. I remember going to a screening, and for some reason, I don't know if they didn't like their performances, but a lot of the big acts didn't give them releases. We did, of course, because we wanted, oh, cool, we're going to be in a film. But I don't think they got enough of the big acts to give them releases so that they could justify putting the rest of the thing together.
Kind of like Woodstock when CSNY wouldn't allow their video part to be on at the time, and a lot of
Creedence Clearwater too.
Yeah, there you go. There's a whole slew of them.
Well, their live performance just came out a couple years ago, and they sounded so great. You're wondering, holy mackerel,
what were you thinking? Yeah,
I guess it was because it was the middle of the night, and the fans, half people were asleep, and they didn't feel like there was a lot of energy coming from the crowd. But boy, they sounded great.
I wonder if that government feedback at that gig had to do with those main acts wanting their names not on there.
Who knows?
Yeah, could be anything.
It was a good gig. A lot of people played.
Was that before you went out to California?
Yeah.
You played that, and then
Right.
you went out and worked on the first album?
No, that we did the first album before that. It would have been after that we went out and ended up actually moving out there.
Oh, okay.
Which
Was there a lot of pressure to put out the second album?
Well, we moved out there to supposedly record the second album. I think, in retrospect, I think moving out there was a mistake. But again, here we are, and that's what happened. But, we were working. Savage Grace was a working band. We were working, and we canceled $20,000 worth of gigs to leave when Warner Brothers wanted us to leave. Now, the inflation, what is that? 80 grand?
Oh, probably.
No, over $100,000 nowadays money. You don't throw $20,000 gigs away in 1970, to meet some kind of arbitrary schedule created by the record company. At least that's how I feel about it now. We went out there to record, and they put us up, and my understanding is we were the last band that they ever did that for. I mean, they put us in houses. Of course, we paid for everything. So, you think, oh, this is great. But all the money ends up coming off your royalties or whatever.
So what went wrong?
What went wrong? Well, one of the things which Savage Grace was a working band. We were really good at working. And when we weren't working, we got on each other's nerves, And then there's the whole substance abuse thing at the time, I mean, I'm not comfortable even getting into it because it's so alien to me and it's so screwed up so many people in Michigan and all over the country. But, we had guys, and I'm not going to exclude myself, who were just, drinking too much or taking too much of this or whatever. And it messes up your personal relationships. It screws up how well you play music, all that kind of stuff. So that's part of it. And then part of it is that we were a working band and, cancel all these gigs, move out to LA. What are we doing? Nothing for a while. Nothing. We weren't good at doing nothing. We were good at working. I loved those guys when we were working. You'd be on the stage, turn around and go, son of a seahorse. John Cena, he's Bill Evans, for pity's sake. The guy's, that's a little extreme, but he was really, really, really good. And Koss, when he was at his best, you go, my gosh, what am I hearing here? So it created camaraderie, respect, and then you're suddenly not working. So you get to see all the warts.
Yeah.
And I was younger than all those guys. So a lot of it was the not working, and then what do you do when you don't work? Well, maybe you drink a little more than you used to.
Take a little more of this or that.
Yeah, take a little
more.
What
about the use of that for creativity purposes, which comes up on our podcast once in a while? Did you find that a thing that you were going through at the same time? Like, well, hey, we can write this record. Maybe we need to be a little more effed up here or something. Or whatever.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what I thought about that at the time. I know now, I don't really think that any of that stuff makes me more creative. It makes me less creative, And I like doing gigs that I remember the whole gig from beginning to end, and feel like I have control of my instrument. Yeah. I can feel, I can hear what I'm doing. I can feel it where my voice is in my body. And I think then the folks that are listening, they get a much better performance. I don't even like the word performance. They get, this expression. Exactly. They get me. They get this my interpretation of these tunes in the most clear, focused way they can. There's nothing. It's nothing pulling me out of the way. Oh, wow. Yeah. That's really cool, dude.
Was it a young man seeing this going down and going, I don't want anything to do with it too, going on at the time?
Nah.
Being the young guy in the band?
I was definitely a young man, but I think I was as silly as anybody else.
Fair.
Sooner or later you got to get it together or you die.
So did you work with the same people for the second album? Same studio?
No, we did some different. We ended up doing some work most of it was in Sunset Sound, which is, I believe, where the Doors recorded, and Led Zeppelin was working on a record at that time. It was Sunset, good studio. Joe Wizard was out. John Haney came in, and Haney had done the Beau Brummels and worked with Judy Collins. More as an engineer, and he was producing. And then I believe, I'm not sure, he used Jeff Jones as a second engineer, and he did some of the engineering too. So it was a different crew. But despite all the stuff that was going on, we had gotten to be a tighter band. I was a better bass player. And we had a good amount of tunes. I wish maybe we'd written a few more so we had more to choose from. But we did it at Sunset, and the sessions went pretty well in general. A little bit of friction. I think I was starting to feel like I wanted to contribute more as a writer, and that I wanted to not get so much direction is one thing, but we'll sing it this way is different than, maybe if we had a softer approach on the first verse, it would build or whatever, So I think, and
being produced.
Yeah, being produced is okay if it's done properly. And I like John Haney. I thought he was a cool guy. I remember going with Judy. I had just met Judy, my wife, and we were out there, and we went to John Haney's house once after we went to dinner, and Judy was wearing hot pants. And Haney was like, "Whoa, dude, what's going on here, man?" And I was like, "Yeah, John, I really like her a lot, But
same one she has on right now.
Yeah, right.
For all you podcasters.
Yeah, but so I mean, I liked working with John. I think there was a little tension in the band, but we were professional enough to get the work done, and we did some good work on it. I still listen to some of that album and say, wow, I like some of the bass playing more than I liked it on the first album.
But the album didn't do as well, though, right?
No, that's what I heard, but it's interesting. I got a royalty check for Sanskrit. Jeff Jones and I wrote Sanskrit together, which was on that record, and I got a decent royalty check for it. And I was doing some back figure, and I said, "They said we didn't sell many copies, so how did I get this check for $400?" And Jeff got a check for $400. It's one song on a double-sided record, so it only gets a tiny piece of the money. What happened here? And then later I ended up talking to a secretary at Warner Brothers who had said, "Oh, you guys sold more albums than you ever knew." Basically dropped a bomb and then sort of let it hang.
Oh, okay.
But
it was almost like they didn't want to tell you because they knew that you guys were on your outs or something. Or
who knows?
Wow. Wow, that could have been a game changer.
Yeah, right. So who knows? And then. Yeah, I mean,
Were you guys happy with the writing on it? I mean, it's obviously you had more time to sit down, but less time to come up with the concept, right, so you could hone your skills that you toured all for. This is a fantastic thing. The sophomore albums, man.
Right.
We really can write. We really can play now, but we only got 1 year to do it. Whereas that first album, we had our whole life to build up to for some great songs. How did you feel about that?
Well, again, I think that we should have done. I wish we'd had a few more songs to choose from, because we had to pretty much work with what we had. And I remember there was one song, Blind Man, which I think has some great pieces to it, especially the blues-oriented part. And then it basically changes time signature and goes into a whole other piece. I never felt those two fit together, but it was almost like we had to make them fit. And it wasn't like a piece from Sgt. Pepper where they took a McCartney thing and Lennon thing and made them fit, and it was incredible. It was like, yeah, I don't know if they really, it's supposed to be this, but it's kind of like there was that. And I struggled with some of the tunes vocally because the songs were written to be played how the guys wanted to play them. Mm-hmm. And some of them should have been in different keys for me to sing them. And I was just at that point had started studying voice again, and I remember bringing that. I said, "Guys, this should be in C, not in D. I don't want to do it in D, mm-hmm. because I was getting a better feel of where my voice really was, how I was going to keep it going, all that stuff." And there was some real resistance to, we don't want to play. It's got to be an A because it's cool to play. Yeah. It's like, well, I dig it. I play guitar too, but it really needs to be in G, and then sometimes nowadays if you say, well, I want to play it in G flat. Yeah. I mean, F sharp or, A flat.
Right.
What? Yeah. Guys just don't want to do it. It's like, well, I'm not singing it in B flat. When I'm not singing it in B, I'm singing it down here, or we ain't doing it. But back then, I didn't have the confidence to just say, hey, no, thank you. I mean, someone probably would have jumped me and beat me, from the record company. They would have come and just, what do you mean you're not singing it, kid? Come on.
Oh, man.
But I can still sing, so some of that, was worth it, especially later with other bands. I really learned for later bands, as some horn bands that I was in and stuff, to just say, hey, I'm glad you dig it in D, but we're doing it in C, and I'm not singing it. And if you don't sing it, it's amazing. Either the song doesn't get done, or you end up singing it in the key you wanted to sing it, and it all works out. And you can still sing.
Great point.
So,
especially when as you get going, it's you know where your voice is at. You know where you feel comfortable. Do it right.
Well, why does Savage Grace break up then? You got 2 albums out. You're on a major record label.
All right, and we did 3 gigs with Hendrix before we broke up. We were scheduled for 3. 1 was canceled, and we did 2 of them. I think it was Milwaukee and Madison. Hendrix was incredible. He had gotten to the point where I remember talking to his roadie, and he had said Hendrix feels like people, he's a clown. He's not doing all that weird stuff anymore. He just came out and played brilliantly.
Was that when Buddy was on drums?
No, it was still Mitch.
Still Mitch, okay.
Yeah, but I remember doing a couple dates with him. That was cool. We were out in Scituate, Massachusetts. We did a Cohasset, maybe, a bunch of stuff on the East Coast. I don't know. It just, I think the band was, whether we would have held on or not, I don't know. And I go through different thoughts about this, but I actually think the band was broken up. I think that Cavallo, especially Cavallo and Ruffalo, wanted Ron and John, because they were the writers, to go on, and they wanted that duo, the Senior Koss duo. Also, I remember Mo Austin asked me to stop riding my motorcycle. And Mo Austin, he was Frank Sinatra's accountant, was the head of Reprise Records. Incredible guy. He asked me to stop riding my motorcycle, and I said no. And I'm thinking maybe that was part of, I was just a little bit too headstrong,
too bold,
too cocky, too bold.
Did you see less money at that point? Is that, or promotion? Is that where you're heading with that?
Well, this was about the time where supposedly we had a number 1 single in San Jose, and they didn't do anything with it. Now, exactly where that falls, I don't know. But that whole, maybe I should have been Mo. I liked Mo. I should have had a discussion with him instead of being a snotty little kid. No.
So there had been a point though at the end where your heart was broken because the gig was over. What brought that on? What took it to that spot?
Well, it was. I remember it's just the band's done. Ron was a nice guy. I ended up staying at his house. My gear that I'd used, I had my bass, but the acoustic amps and all that stuff, management grabbed that. I had my motorcycle because I had bought that myself. I ended up working in a non-union hinge factory, loading freight cars, driving a high-low, and none of that's bad. Mm-hmm. It was cool. I ended up loading freight cars, loading semis with a lot of Hispanic and black dudes. It was cool.
Is this in Detroit?
This was in L.A. Van Nuys.
Okay.
And I remember it was
71.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. Well, then it was good for me. I'm driving to work in the rain on my bike.
Perspective.
Gives you some. Yeah, exactly. Straightened me out a little bit. Was in the work. I was hanging out with working men. Mm-hmm. And it was cool. I remember two guys from Germany who were layout engineers. We were out having lunch, and they noticed I wasn't eating because I didn't have any money. So they gave me a quarter so I could buy a yogurt. It was like, these guys are cool. I think I paid them back the quarter later, but mm-hmm. it was a really was a horrible, great time. Wow. You know, I wish my band was together and all that, but I had to get my act together. I worked in a gas station. You know, I stayed with Judy's parents for a while. It was very, it was a time of growth, let's just say. And you said it earlier, perspective. Yeah. You know, and perspective is one of the most important things you can have. You know, do you have this kind of perspective, or do you have an eternal perspective? You know, you have a perspective that's way out there where you're really looking at stuff instead of being all
tunnel vision.
Yeah, so it was a good time because I grew, but I was bitter. I was angry about it. I felt terrible.
And that wraps up part 1 with Mr. Al Jacquez from Savage Grace. We were so grateful to have him up not only for the podcast but to play a show. And in part 2, you're going to get to hear the rest of the story of the reunion, more of the past stories, and as well as some hints towards what we did at the show because he plays live. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for being ears to our MMHP in the 989, and thank you, Al. We'll see you back here in 2 weeks for part 2.
On behalf of our hosts, this podcast wouldn't be here without generosity of the Bay City Historical Museum, which hosts the Rock and Roll Legends Hall of Fame. We'd also like to thank all of our guests, and especially to the listeners. The MMHP is found at 989.network, or where all podcasts can be found. You can find updated information as well as Dr. J and Sir Fred's Picks of the Week on Facebook. Also on Facebook, check out Mr. Mike's Local Music Live series and Scott's Mid-Mitten 15 from Harvest Canteen Studios, featuring one-on-one interviews with Michigan music artists. You can connect with Scott on the web at scottbakermusic.com, Dr. J at michiganrockandrolllegends.com, Sir Fred at fredrife.com, and Mr. Mike on YouTube as Mr. BT1. That's MRBTEE and the number 1.
On behalf of us hosts, Dr. J, Sir Fred, Mr. Mike, and myself, we'd like to thank Mr. Eddie Switek, the voice of the MMHP and the 989.